Welcome back to the channel, lads and ladies, and hopefully Tank Baby will take her morning nap so I can give you guys a little bit of a talk. This is something that's really been bumping around in my mind for a while, and it sort of came along with the realization that I've sort of gotten to the level of skill at this game between developing my skills and building my experience and getting an understanding for the meta of the game, where I guess I've kind of become the kind of player I wanted to be when I first started playing. Does that make sense? So I figured now's a good time to share a few of the pillars that have held me up when it comes to, I guess, getting good at War Thunder. And I've decided that the only place to really have this conversation is in the hangar. Just let me get a little bit organized here and start from the beginning. I think the key to getting good at War Thunder is really the key to getting good at just about anything in life. And that is to learn by doing and to not miss an opportunity to learn. Let's break that down. So, first off, learn by doing. Most of your learning is going to be just learning how to move, how to shoot, and then you start picking up tactics later. But let's move on to the tactical stuff, because when it comes to just repeating a process over and over to get good at aiming, don't get frustrated and just realize that learning or teaching your body to do something well is just going to take a certain amount of time. Once you get past that, then it's time to start thinking about tactics. And again, don't get frustrated. But I really want to talk about tactics. And not specific tactics, but how to think about tactics. So let's look at this American 6.3 lineup. I know a lot of premium vehicles, but this is what I like to play. So that's why I have a lineup made out of premiums. Besides the fact that they're really, really good vehicles, this is one of the most solid lineups you can have. But it's also an extremely diverse lineup. So we have pretty much everything represented here. So tactics. Use your armor. That's a tactic, right? That's something you can try. And there's different ways to use your armor. And this is sort of, for me, this was my first instinct as a player, is to figure out how to tank shots and then be able to have time to carefully aim and be the second person to attack. And if you're an experienced player of War Thunder, or if you have some tactical knowledge, you might recognize the problem with that strategy, and that is that often the first person to attack is the winner of an engagement. And the only way to get past that is to have overwhelming armor, and thus the T-28. How do you overcome overwhelming armor? There's always a weak angle, right? You side attack the T-28. So let's set ourselves up in a scenario. You're facing an actually, you know what? That's a little bit too specific. You see how we presented an idea and we identified the strengths of that strategy and the weaknesses and what makes that possible. Can you play the Super Hellcat with the overwhelming armor principle in mind? Not likely. You're not going to have overwhelming armor against anyone. So you need to pick a different tactic. And the first tip that I'd like to share with you guys about getting good at War Thunder when it comes to tactics is analyze your tactics. Number one, is the tactic that I'm using the best tactic for this vehicle? Overwhelming armor. Yes. Okay. Overwhelming armor? No. Number two, what tactics are the enemy going to be using? And that comes down to the vehicle that they're using. So just go through the vehicles that you know and then go through the vehicles that you'll be facing, and just in your head imagine a one-on-one. Okay, the Tiger 2P. He has overwhelming armor when it comes to his hull, but his turret is weak. So what tactic would a Tiger 2P use against me? Well, at long range, he'll be in a pretty good position. But at close range, he's going to want to get the first shot to disable me in one way or another. And so I can expect him to go for a quick kill or a disable on, say, the cannon barrel. So if I'm in the T-28 and I'm imagining facing Tiger 2Ps, I would imagine them going for the cannon barrel, or just engaging in a slugfest at long range where they're maybe popping out and then popping back behind a building, so I don't have a chance to get a good shot at their turret. And as a T-28, how do I deal with that? Number one, if they're at close range, I would want to be the first person to get a shot off. Aim for that weak spot or aim for their cannon barrel and go for it. And then don't sit still to let them have a chance to disable me, hitting a track or hitting the cannon barrel and then moving out of the way. Because again, T-28, long reload, not a lot of mobility. So that's a way that you build your tactics around the specific vehicle you're using. For the Super Hellcat, what tactic would I build up around? Mobility. That's a huge school. So there's a few ways to make mobility work for you, and it really comes down to trial and error. And that's the next point I want to talk about with building your tactics. So, trial and error is really a process of trying something and finding out why it didn't work. It's not really like trying something and hoping it works. You're actually looking forward to seeing how it fails. You take your techniques and you take your tricks and you use them exactly the way you plan to from the beginning. So if my strategy is to flank the enemy and just go far around where I expect the enemy to be moving, then I use my bit of mobility, I flank, I commit to it, even if I don't see, even if I'm not sure it's the best strategy for a particular match, I'll try it anyway and just see what happens, because that's how you gather information. And then you play that match and you don't see anyone. So what do you do next? You try something just a little bit different. Instead of flanking all the way around the map, we move toward the middle and then we flank just off to the side. And by doing things like that, you take a strategy, you play that strategy exactly the way, in a pure way, you know what I mean? You commit to that strategy, and then you gather information. And I think the thing that helps about deciding to play that way when you're building your techniques is that you're not surprised when things go wrong. In fact, your whole goal is to take some idea and push it to the point where something breaks. And then you just identify why it broke. And then you modify your strategy to deal with how it broke specifically. So with regard to the Super Hellcat, again, flanking all the way around the map, we didn't see anybody, or we saw just one guy and he got eyes on us first. So it's a 50-50 chance for us to get one kill. That's not very good odds when it comes to a tank battle, and it's not all that good for making progress in the game. So how do we change that strategy? And as I said, you just flank a bit less, you encounter more people, you get side shots on more people, and then in the 50% or 25% of situations where some other flanker gets the jump on you, that's okay, because you end up getting more kills. And then you think, okay, well, flanking around the side of the middle got me more contact with the enemy, but I ended up getting taken down before I could really make a huge difference in the match. Why was that? And after a few more battles, you come to the conclusion it was because someone on the enemy team knew where I was, because they were paying attention to the map, and they came around just in an area where I wouldn't notice them and took me down. So what can I do to change that situation? And that gets into a much more complex resolution. And you end up coming to the realization that you start by going where the enemy doesn't expect you to be, and then you need to not stay in that area. You need to move away. And you almost end up zigzagging around the map, going from cover to cover, just putting yourself in a position where it's almost like playing chess at that point. And that's really the fun of a mobile vehicle, is getting your pawn into position to capture the enemy queen because you were moving in areas they didn't expect you to be. It's actually more like playing a knight in the game of chess. I'm a huge fan of knights because they're a lot more difficult to pin down than other pieces. This is a rook. This is a castle. And gameplay for this is different. And when you're building your tactics around superior armor, number one, you can never completely rely on your armor. Even in an overpowered monster like the T-28, you can face 6.7 vehicles that have heat FS or higher battle rating vehicles. So you can't really build your strategy around entirely one thing, but they definitely play differently. The mobility options just are not there for the T-28. And then you look at something like the M26, and you sort of build your deck. It's almost like building a deck of cards, where you're like, I'm going to play the mobility card. And even though the M26, I called it the wrong thing, didn't I? Even though the M26 might not have the best mobility, it has better mobility than other vehicles. And sometimes you play that mobility card. You say against a Tiger 2, they're getting bogged down in the middle of town, and you think, I know they're there just a block away. Do I go head on and go for overwhelming armor or overwhelming firepower? Neither of which you possess. That's not a wise decision, my son. And maybe you try that a few times, and instead of getting frustrated by the fact that you're losing, insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I think that's not actually a good definition of insanity, but it is a good definition of a refusal to learn. Did you guys watch my idiot video? And so, instead of getting frustrated, try something else. And that's where a vehicle like the M26 and the premium version of the T99, it's not all that different from the regular M26, and that's why it has the same battle rating. I've had a blast in it just because when you do get to use the rockets for cool stuff, it's just really cool. And I think that's the perfect description of a premium vehicle. It's a regular vehicle that can do one thing that's really cool but doesn't break the game. I haven't seen too many people complaining about this one. In fact, I think it's one of the best premiums you can get. So go ahead, buy the Calliope. It's the most fun you can have in a tank, and the M26 is a lot of fun as well. Moving on. This is a super expensive premium. Buy it on sale. But to get back to the point of this talk, vehicles like the M26, like the Sherman, to a certain extent like the T-34 and the Panzer IV, although the Panzer IV starts to get into more of the overwhelming firepower category. But these vehicles that are really epitomized by the Sherman and a lot of American designs, you could look at them and go, it's not the best at anything. What's the use? It's like having a deck of cards where you have every single one of the cards in your hand. You might not have the strongest card to play, but you always have a counter. You always have another card you could try. And that's why I've started to fall in love with middle-of-the-road vehicles like the M26. So to talk about getting good with these middle-of-the-road vehicles that can do just about everything reasonably well. Know your enemy. Know what tactic they're going to use. Remember, just assume that they're going to use the best tactic for their vehicle. And generally, if they don't use the best tactic, you're still in a position of advantage if you assume they're going to use the best tactic. You're up against a Tiger 2 H. It's your nightmare. What do you use? Cover, mobility, stealth, right? Get around to their side. It only takes one shot from that 90mm cannon because you are the best at one thing, and that is post-penetration effect. The American 90mm is incredible. It's right up there with the best derp guns when it comes to taking down things with one solid penetration. Side shots, my boy. It's all about the side shots. Up against something lightly armored, be the first person to get around on target. So that's that sort of twitch or accuracy, depending upon the ranges you're engaging at. Just to share a general tip, don't ever expose yourself for more than you need to. I've talked about never engage in a fair fight when it comes to air battles. I've talked about only fight one person at a time when it comes to tanks. If you have the choice, attack the one person who knows where you are, and if more than one person knows where you are, it's time to move. Always have an escape route, always attack from a position of advantage. These are all lessons I've learned by applying this overarching strategy of pick a strategy, know why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just do what feels right, but decide, I'm doing this because insert reason. Observe. When something goes wrong, figure out why. Oh, it's because their vehicle's overpowered. Okay, but specifically, what about them is stronger than you? Do they have better armor? Do they have a better gun? Is your armor useless against them? Do they have better mobility? Did they get into a position you didn't expect them to be? Each one of these situations has a counter. My armor is useless. Okay. There's 3 types of armor that can protect you from any enemy weapon: the air, the ground, and your allies. So use those. Let someone drive in front of you if you feel that your armor is useless. Hide behind a hill. Allow the enemy to miss. These are all ways to counter having useless armor. My gun's useless. You know what? You're probably right. But there's usually some place you can make it work, and that then comes into positioning. So you were in the wrong place at the wrong time if you feel that your gun is useless. And this has been really tempting for me, especially at long-range engagements, to just try to become better at aiming than my enemy. Even if they have the armor advantage, I'm thinking Tiger 2H here especially. They're really good at long-range engagements. Fast reload, high-velocity gun, good armor, especially with its very small weak spots. Let's take a look at the Tiger 2H since we're here in the hangar, just to emphasize my point. I used to suck with this vehicle, and now I think it's still right up there with the strongest heavy tanks at 6.7. So looking at your weak spots, it's right here and a little bit up to here, and then right here and a little bit up to there. It's like a foot or a foot and a half across for your weak spots on either side. At long range, that's 2 or 3 pixels. That's how good your aim has to be to take this tank down. So long range, king. It's been very tempting for me to just try and hit those 3 pixels, when really what I should do is pop back behind a hill, reposition, break line of sight so they don't know where I am, observe them to see where they're looking, and then go where they don't expect me to be. Disengage. That's a big thing for me, learning when to disengage. Anyway, I think with that I'll wrap this up. I've talked long enough, but the main point I'd like to share with you guys is, number 1, I've finally gotten to the place where I actually feel like I'm good at War Thunder, and that feels great. And number 2, I got here by thinking about specifically, what is my strategy, what breaks my strategy, and what can I do to just try something else. And if you don't know how to overcome something, Just try literally anything other than what you're doing. And you'll be surprised. Sometimes you'll find a winning strategy that you thought would never work, but it turns out it does. Anyway, guys, catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.